It's television man. This edition of AWN Presents will be devoted entirely to the Black Heritage Museum. When I met with Dr. Scott Taylor at the museum, we decided it would be best to treat the session as a visit rather than as a rehearsed interview. What you are about to see and hear is more like a chat, with Dr. Taylor talking to me while I was running the camera. I did have to re-record my questions for better sound, since I wasn't on mic at the time. We had more fun this way, and I think it captures the warm, relaxed experience that you'll enjoy when you visit in person.
I'm Scott Taylor, Director and President of the Black Heritage Museum of Arlington. We're on 345B Columbia Pike. We're open Thursdays and Saturdays, Thursdays 3 to 6 and Saturdays 2 to 5.
How did the museum get started?
This museum started in 1995. It was founded by Evelyn Syphax, and I have her pen here. She was also the first Black president of the Arlington Historical Society, and she decided that to start this museum so we could just talk about this side of Arlington and this history. And the history is rich, and I guarantee you if you come, you're going to learn some things that you never did know about Arlington.
Please tell us about what's here.
Right, well, we have Freedmen's Village. We're going to talk about some things about the Arlington House. We actually have a display of Freedmen's Village, and there's some people that lived in Arlington that are famous folklore heroes that you may not have known. We're talking a little bit about the lunch counter sit-ins. We have a superstar singer, Grammy Award-winning singer that we talk about, and of course a gentleman that invented blood plasma. And all of these were Arlingtonians at one time or the other.
Tell us about the Hoffman Boston School.
Hoffman Boston School. Hoffman Boston School was a school that was, for Black people, the only high school. It was in the Johnson Hill area. So Hoffman Boston was built in 1916 by a guy named Noble Thomas. It lasted till about 1964. That was the last class, and we actually have some yearbooks from that time. If you want to come down and look at them. When the schools got integrated, then students went to the other high schools.
What about Dr. Charles Drew?
Yeah, Charles Drew. I'm not sure what year he came here. He wasn't born here, but he did live here, and he is the father of the blood bank. His home is still here in Arlington. He, of course, died in a car accident. And then there's Drew Elementary School that was named after him. But we're also very, very proud that he was one time an Arlington resident here.
Have you met any of the people featured here?
Oh my gosh. Aside from Joan Mulholland, I'm friends with Joan. I've met all the first 4 kids that went to Stratford. They lived in my neighborhood. There are some people, and this is something that is really, really dear to me, because when I got these pictures, I collect them, I saw this picture here. This is my mom right here. This is my mom in the 10th grade. And so that I know her very well. I knew Mrs. Ham. Mrs. Ham, I went to school with her daughter. Let's see, who else did I know? Can't go back to George Washington days, can we? There's a gentleman here who was the very first, his name was Alfred Clark, who was the very first fire chief in Arlington. I knew him very, very well. He lived right behind me. Langston Center has a area we call Langston Brown, where Lil Brown, I knew Lil Brown very well. So yeah, I knew a lot of these people. Come to think about it, I knew a lot of them, yeah.
Your displays begin with George Washington.
Well, you know, George Washington, father of our country, our very first president, he got slaves. I think he got 13, if I'm not, I think so, when he was like very small child when his dad died. The first real ironic thing about Washington is that he spoke out against slavery, although he did have slaves. But we have to keep in mind that it was legal. I guess he, you know, showed that he was a person because he did acknowledge marriages. There was an enslaved person named William Lee, whom he was very, very close with. And I would tell anybody, please go down to Mount Vernon and take the tour there. You see the buildings that are there and the architecture. These were made and designed by the enslaved people that were there.
Some say that Thomas Jefferson couldn't afford to free his slaves.
Washington was the direct opposite. He was very frugal and very good with money. And he actually, so that's another reason why he may have been outspoken about slavery, because he had a surplus of enslaved people. And you had to you had to always think about the fact that you had to, you know, if these people need medical care or whatever, food, whatever, you had to supply it. And he was very cheap. So what he did do was he loaned out some of the people, and that's why when you do census and do genealogy, it's kind of hard to find slaves, because some were loaned out, and a lot of enslaved people did not use their master's last names, they used their own. So we see people sometimes with just one name or just different names, so it's hard to connect people.
I noticed a certain picture in the Hoffman Boston exhibit.
This is a graduation picture, and this here is Roberta Flack, and this lady here is one of my cousins, but Dr. Alfred Taylor, I don't know if you know Dr. Taylor. He's a historian here in Arlington. He's, I think he's 89 years old. He was able to identify a lot of these people, so I had to have him back so I can write down the names.
Let's take a look at the St. John's Church exhibit.
Okay, so St. John's Church, which is on Columbia Pike, was established in 1903 and built in 1908. It really, at the time, was a church that was for a lot of people from Queen City. And these children here were basically living in Queen City, and they would go to St. John's Church for school. Arlington had rented a room in St. John's Church for colored children, is what they called them, black children, to go to school there. So the school ran from, I think, 1910 to 1913. And I was given this picture of some of the kids that went there. This is this is the early 1900s here. I guess other school, the Kemper Road School came. I don't know what year that was, but one of the reasons why they just rented it out for that time was because the kids would have to cross the street to go to another school. So I can't remember what school that was. It was a school up here in Johnson Hill. So they rented this room out for these kids so they wouldn't have to cross the street.
What about the Queen Street community?
Right. So I'm not sure what year this area actually erected, but I do know for a fact that the land was purchased by Mount Olive Baptist Church, And they had their own fire department, which was the East Arlington Community Fire Department. And there was a place called Oddfellows Home, which you could have weddings there. They had lodge meetings. St. John's Church started there. Also, it was an organization that they would raise money for people who would lay on their mortgages so they wouldn't lose their homes. But of course, in the 1940s, we go into World War II, and America was building the Pentagon, and so they wanted a way to get in, and they decided to destroy this community. The people were warned that that was going to happen, but they didn't tell them what day or when it was going to happen. And basically, somebody was up having a cup of coffee in the morning, and they heard a bulldozer come in. It was like that, and people had to scatter. The people who owned their homes and properties did get a stipend, but if you were renting or something like that, you were just displaced. Then Eleanor Roosevelt came up with a trailer park, which was down off of Queen Street, and these are some of the trailers, how the people lived for 2 years. And then, of course, they found other places. The only person I know still around from this time was a man named William Bolin, who was also an educator in Arlington. He's still with us. He was a teacher at Langston School on Halls Hill, and then he was with me at Reed Elementary, and when I went to Glebe Elementary, he was there. So he really is a well-known person in the black community as far as education, and he was from Queen City. They're now building a exhibit or a tower or something to represent this area and what they went through, and that should be unveiled in April of this year.
Now that Dr. Taylor has provided the names of some of the people honored at the museum, let's take some time to learn a little more about them. He mentioned Noble Thomas and the Hoffman Boston Junior High School. During the Civil War, the United States government seized the abandoned Arlington House and surrounding land and used a portion of it to create the first Freedmen's Village in Virginia. Another portion was used to bury Union soldiers killed in the Civil War. Freedmen's Village would later turn into a thriving African-American community where a schoolhouse for black children was built where Hoffman Boston is today. Noble Thomas was the first African-American to construct a public building in Virginia. He built the Hoffman Boston School in 1916. Until then, there had been no school within the county for the children of freed slaves to attend, so it fell to the inhabitants of Freedmen's Village to educate them. Schooling originally took place in various homes within the village. Originally known as the Jefferson School, it was later renamed Hoffman Boston after Edward C. Hoffman, the school's first principal, and Ella Boston, principal of Kemper Elementary School, which was another school serving Arlington County's black community. In its early years, the school educated students from grades 1 through 8. In 1930, Arlington County responded to an increasing population by opening up its first high school, but the enrollment was limited to white children only. African American students had no opportunity until years later when, in 1942, a group of high school seniors became the first graduating class at Hoffman Boston. Later, in response to the 1954 Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board of Education against segregated public schools, the Arlington County Board decided to comply with the ruling, but only in 1956. Later, the school board decided to close Hoffman Boston High School as many of its students and teachers were transferred to other area schools. The 1964 graduating class became Hoffman Boston's last. Dr. Taylor also mentioned a Grammy-winning recording artist. Her name is Roberta Flack. Roberta Flack was born near Asheville, North Carolina in 1937 and moved to Arlington's Green Valley neighborhood when she was 5 years old. She began playing the organ and piano around the age of 9, performing at local churches. She grew up playing Chopin, Schumann, Bach, and Beethoven, and at the age of 13, she won a statewide contest by performing a Scarlatti sonata. Ms. Flack attended Hoffman Boston High School until the age of 15, when she was awarded a full music scholarship to Howard University. After graduating from there at 19, she went on to become a music teacher in Farmville, North Carolina, teaching about 1,300 students at all grade levels in the city's segregated school system. Later, she decided to pursue a music career. Of that time in her life, she said, "It took courage to leave my classroom job because I was a black person who had grown up in Arlington, Virginia through the 50s and 60s. Now I'm teaching school in the late 60s and I decide I want to sing." These days, there's lots of things that you can go for, but in those days, you had to have a lot of heart and a strong desire to do that. Perhaps Ms. Flack's best remembered recorded performance is the song, "The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face." Dr. Taylor also mentioned another doctor, Dr. Charles Drew. Dr. Charles Drew was an American surgeon and medical researcher. He researched in the field of blood transfusions and developed improved techniques for blood storage and applied his expert knowledge to developing large-scale blood banks. Through this blood preservation research, he realized that blood plasma was able to be preserved 2 months longer through deliquification, or the separation of liquid blood from the cells. When ready for use, the plasma would then be able to return to its original state via reconstitution. This thesis earned him his Doctor of Science in Medicine degree in 1940. He was the first African American to do so. However, the District of Columbia chapter of the American Medical Association allowed only white doctors to join, so Dr. Drew died without ever having been accepted for membership in the American Medical Association. Dr. Drew's discoveries allowed medics to save thousands of Allied forces' lives during World War II. He was appointed as director for the first American Red Cross blood bank in February 1941. The blood bank supplied blood to the United States Army and Navy. However, those entities ruled that the blood of African Americans would have to be stored separately from that of whites. Dr. Drew objected to this exclusion of African Americans' blood from plasma supply networks. He protested against the practice of racial segregation in the donation of blood since it lacked scientific foundation. And in 1942, he resigned his position with the American Red Cross. However, that policy of blood segregation remained until the year of Dr. Drew's death in 1950. Dr. Taylor also mentioned having met Joan Mulholland. Joan Mulholland was a civil rights advocate in the 1960s. She was born in Washington, D.C., and raised in Arlington, but her great-grandparents had been slave owners in Georgia. Ms. Mulholland was one of the Freedom Riders who was arrested in Jackson, Mississippi in 1961. She was confined for 2 months in the maximum security unit of the Mississippi State Penitentiary. The following year, she became the first white student to enroll in Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi, and she served as the local secretary of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Then there were the Stratford students, the 4 students who integrated Stratford Junior High School on February 2, 1959. They were Ronald Deskins, Michael Jones, Lance Newman, and Gloria Thompson. As a preventive measure against violence, 100 police officers surrounded the school in Arlington. Television cameras recorded the event. However, February 2nd, 1959 was later called by local newspapers the day that nothing happened. No violence occurred, and it is believed that this event helped bring an end to the massive resistance movement in Virginia. The Stratford School has since been renamed to the Dorothy Ham Middle School, which brings us to Dorothy Ham. Dorothy Ham was an important figure in the civil rights movement in the Commonwealth of Virginia. She was also an author, teacher, and elections officer. Ms. Ham led efforts to desegregate schools in Virginia, to improve fairness in elections, and equal access to jobs, housing, restaurants, theaters, and hospital rooms. She was a plaintiff in 5 landmark court cases affecting civil rights, including the 1956 decision that ended school segregation in Arlington County. Her play, Our Heritage, Slavery to Freedom, 1776 to 1976, has been designated an official bicentennial event by Arlington County. Her documentary, Our Struggle for Equality, 25 years ago, is televised annually during Black History Month. Ms. Ham was an officer of elections in Arlington County for more than 27 years. She served as a delegate to Arlington County and state conventions in 1964. She was later appointed assistant registrar and a chief election officer in the Woodlawn precinct in Arlington. She worked with the Congress of Racial Equality as they organized in Arlington and participated in the 1968 Poor People's March on Washington. Ms. Ham led the establishment of a Head Start program in Arlington in the mid-1960s and taught there for several years. She was also a leader in 3 churches she attended over the years, including Wright's Chapel United Methodist Church, where she served as secretary, trustee, and in the drama group. She received the first Arlington County Martin Luther King Jr. Award for Outstanding Volunteer Service. In 2018, the Dorothy Ham Middle School in Arlington was named in her honor. Next, there's Alfred Clark. Captain Clark. Alfred Clark was one of the original paid firefighters of Fire Station No. 8 in Arlington in 1951. In 1957, Alfred Clark became the first African-American fire captain in the county, continuing to serve at Station No. 8. His daughter recalled that when the station later became integrated in the 1960s, some white firefighters said they would not serve under him, and even wrote it on the chalkboard, using an all-too-familiar racial epithet. However, the battalion chief came up, ordered the writing removed, and told the white firefighters they will serve and respect Captain Clark. Captain Clark served the community with honor for 26 years before his retirement. Finally, Lillian Brown. Lillian Brown was a lifelong Arlington resident, civil rights, and neighborhood activist. She focused on improving housing, daycare, recreation, and education in Arlington. She was also a director of Head Start, then became executive director of the Arlington Community Action Program, which is the agency over Head Start and many other community support programs. These are only a few of the people you can learn about at the Black Heritage Museum. In addition, there are some exhibits that help demonstrate what life was like in Arlington for African Americans. These are far more effective than an online presentation or video. The African Heritage Museum is a place that should be experienced by visiting.
So we're proud of the collections that we have, and we really want you to come down here and see our displays and find a little bit about the other side of Arlington. Our mission is to be a voice for these people, these unsung heroes that are not just great people, but they were at one time great Arlingtonians.
One last thing. Does the museum accept donations?
So if you want to donate, you can go to our website, which is arlingtonblackheritage.org. And we accept it. That's all I can say.